hide behind these proceedings that are secret. No one knows what's going on in that room other than the prosecutor. So you have the grand jurors, the prosecutor, and a court reporter who's sworn to secrecy. Nobody else. And so we can't necessarily say, okay, well, he presented X, Y, and Z. We don't know what he presented. We don't know what direction he took this grand jury in. And remember, they're lay people. He's the person that's guiding them. He tells them what charges to bring, and he tells them what the law is. And so, you know, we kind of already knew. I kind of knew that there would be an indictment, at least for one of the officers, because they got fired. And the police chief who fired him used actual legal language that was pretty much a tee up, you know, for actual criminal charges. But the other two, not so much. So I kind of want to get your take on what you thought would happen today. Were you surprised at all? Did you expect it to happen? Because, I mean, the circumstances, you know, surrounding Breonna's death was simply that she was asleep. A knock came at the door. She's walking towards the door, and then that's where she was killed. So you would think that if it's not going to happen under those circumstances, then what circumstances will charges actually be filed? So give me your thoughts. Not surprised, of course. Not surprised. Not surprised. And let me tell you something else. If history is any indication, we knew this was coming. And the process with grand juries are different when cops are the actual target. And I say that because I represented a lot of people who had grand juries that were going to be assembled for their case. And rarely ever did we ever know, my client and me, when the grand jury was meeting, much less being able to testify in those hearings. Cops, when they are the target of grand juries, they are more than likely going to come before the grand jury to testify. Prosecutors allow that to happen. And they're allowed to sit in front of this grand jury and testify for hours, telling them their side of the story. Being human, the prosecutor is able to humanize them. And so with no questions coming from the other side, because the defense attorney can't go inside, you're depending on the prosecutor to poke holes in whatever story this officer is telling this grand jury. Do they challenge that story is the question. And again, we don't know. We won't know. And during Daniel Cameron's press conference, a reporter asked, were the officers allowed to testify? He did not want to answer that question. All he said was there was testimony. And I'm not going to get into the specifics. I can tell you right now, more than likely, those officers either testified in person or were able to prepare a written statement that was read to the grand jury, period. And so he won't tell us the makeup of the jury, the racial makeup of the jury. And that's because, again, their identities are kept secret. Even though he didn't necessarily have to identify who they were, all he had to do was tell us the makeup. Because, of course, grand juries and juries in general should be representations of the community, should represent a cross-section of the community. So we don't even know what the makeup is. We don't know what the evidence was presented. Again, this process is secret. And until it's transparent, until they allow other people like the defense to come in there to see, we will never be able to say what happened and how they came to this conclusion. Will the racial makeup ever be made public? No. Unless a grand juror decides to speak, which is very rare, especially in a high-profile case like this one. Likely not going to happen. We won't know. This also brings me to my next point. I get a lot of friends who call because they know I'm a lawyer and I may have the answer how they can get out of jury duty, and I automatically hang up on them. I never want to hear anybody ask how they can get out of serving as a juror. This is why it's so incredibly important. I'm not trying to be preachy, but I'm telling you, there are a number of times I'm picking a jury and I'm wishing that there were more people that actually look like my client, because more than likely my client's brown or black. So I'm wishing that I don't get those calls. I'm wishing that people didn't want to get out of those important ways to serve. We need them the most, because this is what we get. We get reaction. We're crying why, and we don't understand. But it's in what we do every day and what we avoid doing. Have to be a part of the process. Amen. Zen fully sweet, I agree. So why are there charges for the wrong house? They didn't. So there are a couple of misconceptions and information that's just flat out wrong. Breonna Taylor did not die in her bed. That's false. She was initially in her bed, but then was walking towards the door once they heard knocks, and her and Kenneth Walker were coming through the hallway, and that's when the shots were fired, and she died in the hallway. So she was not asleep.